Um, I want to introduce Kathy Riley, who has been around town for a long time, and I'm not going to tell her story. I will let her do that. And thank you, Kathy, for doing this today. We are looking forward to hearing your story.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for being here to listen. It's been quite a journey actually putting it together, along with the story I'm about to tell. One question that has occupied me for a while is this: in a long life, how do we connect the children we once were to the adults we later became? So many decisions and so many events come in between. So today I'd like to reflect on this question and also share some stories from my life journey, which has been 73 years long so far. I was born in 1947 in Chicago, the first child of John and Angie Riley. We lived in an apartment, but by the time I was 5, my parents had saved enough money for their dream, which was to buy a small house in nearby Hammond, Indiana. It was convenient for my dad's work. He was a heavy equipment operator. And industrial America was booming then. Gary, Indiana was right next door with its steel mills, and Whiting had the oil refineries. My dad used to say that the sky was orange sometimes because in the 50s, they still had open hearth steel furnaces. But I was a kid, and for me, the sky was always blue, and summers were oh so long. A few months after we moved, my sister Joni was born. I was almost 6, enjoying a free-range childhood. I spent endless hours outdoors, playing with my friends on the block, except, of course, when I was watching TV. I loved Westerns, especially. And I also loved to read, a passion I got from my mom, who was a homemaker and a great reader. I was shy and kind of a homebody, religious too. We were a Catholic family, but not devout. My sister and I went to public schools with catechism lessons on Sunday. I became a fervent believer in late elementary years and junior high. And for a time, I thought I'd be a nun. What greater job could there be than working for God? As for politics, Dad was a union man and a Democrat, the party of the working man, he told us. My mom said she relied on choosing the best man, and she didn't often tell us who that was. As for music, neither of them felt they had any real ability, and so I thought I probably didn't either. We watched those who did, however. On Saturday nights, the Lawrence Welk Show with their talented cast, the Lennon sisters, Joanne Castle on the accordion, were all guests in our home. When Eileen, my friend across the street, joined the school band, I wanted to be in it too. I had no ability to play an instrument, I thought, or no confidence. So I decided to become a drummer. Mercifully for my family, I did not request a drum set. I had just a little rubber pad to practice on. When I was halfway through high school, we moved back to Chicago. It was a jarring experience. I was still shy and socially awkward, and my new school, a huge, noisy public school, was quite alienating. My strongest memory from that time was my junior high English teacher, not junior high, junior year English teacher, bursting into tears the day President Kennedy was shot. In those days, TV was my entertainment, but it was also my teacher. From news reports, I learned my first lessons about racism and the growing civil rights movement of the late 50s and early 60s. As high school graduation approached, I knew I wanted a smaller school and a Catholic one. Eileen, my childhood friend, was a skeptical Protestant, and she challenged me to prove the Catholic miracles I held as truth. I couldn't do it, but I reasoned that I'd learn how to explain these things if I went to a Catholic school. So I chose Mundelein College, a women's liberal arts school in Chicago. Most of the teachers, but not all, were nuns, Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, a progressive teaching order. They gave me a full scholarship and I graduated debt-free 4 years later. Would that be the case for everyone? My freshman year brought 3 momentous events. First, when I arrived on campus in the fall of '64, I learned that a group of nuns and students were planning a journey to join the final leg of Dr. King's march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. I knew immediately I wanted to go, and after much pleading, my reluctant parents finally signed the permission. So in March of '65, we boarded a bus and headed south. It was an exhilarating experience and my first interracial one. Up to that point, I had lived completely in a white world. And it also marked my first time, I think, to sing in public. Marching down the street, those well-known songs. This little light of mine, ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. We shall overcome. Second momentous event. A required government class introduced me to the brilliant Dr. Ann Matazar. She taught us that politics, coupled with the power of the law, was the main road to social change. Politics was not just voting for a certain party or for the man with the best character. It was something far more encompassing. I was riveted and decided that social science, especially political science, would be my major. I chose a minor in journalism. I liked to write and was good in English. Third, by the end of freshman year, I had not found any religious proofs for my skeptical friend, Eileen. In fact, I realized I had pretty much stopped believing any part of Catholic dogma. This was partly the result of good theology classes. The Bible, one teacher told us, is the story of a community's attempt to reach the divine, not simply a set of rules from on high. Momentous event, yes and no. A major life turn, but surprisingly, this loss of my faith was not traumatic. It had just been replaced. Well, working for social change was my new faith and mission. And of course, there was music. The soundtrack of my college years included Motown, which I still love, Pete Seeger, folk artists like Pete Seeger, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Harry Belafonte, Miriam Makeba, the Clancy Brothers. I had given up the drums and tried to learn the guitar, didn't everyone, but never quite got beyond Tom Dooley and 500 Miles. I had a boyfriend who went to another school. I saw him on weekends, but the rest of the time revolved around studying and socializing with my girlfriends. I wrote stories for the school paper about many things, including the Vietnam War and social issues in Chicago. 1968, the end of my senior year, was a tumultuous year. It was an election year, and I would be able to vote for the first time. With classmates, I went to Wisconsin to campaign for Gene McCarthy, the anti-war candidate, hoping he would win the primary and get the Democratic nomination. Just weeks later, Dr. King was assassinated, as was Robert Kennedy a few weeks after that. What kind of world was I about to enter with graduation so close? Filled with a belief in the necessity for change, I got ready for my first election. Hubert Humphrey versus Richard Nixon, and a spoiler, George Wallace. He ran a third-party white supremacist campaign, and I only wish now we could have put a silver dagger through the heart in that right then and there. I graduated and spent the summer volunteering for a group that was trying to get an anti-war plank in the Democratic platform. We failed. Humphrey got the nomination, of course, and I went home that day unaware of the police beatings of protesters that would occur a few hours later. That became the basis for the film, The Trial of the Chicago Seven. That fall, I got my first job as a reporter for a chain of community newspapers. I stayed there nearly 5 years. Over that time, I became more and more aware of a growing feminist movement. I went to my first feminist demonstration in 1970, a one-day women's strike. "Don't iron while the strike is hot," was our slogan. Meanwhile, I had broken up with my college boyfriend, but was dating other guys. I was 24 when I faced a crisis. I became pregnant and decided to seek an abortion, pre-Roe versus Wade. Fortunately, a lower court decision in Western Wisconsin had opened the door to legal abortions there, and I made an appointment. It was a very difficult decision. When the day came, a nurse came out to the waiting room to tell us that no procedures could happen that day because the Attorney General had threatened to pull the doctor's license. We were sent to another doctor who had performed abortions underground for decades, and I had a safe experience. I tell you this painful story today because of my shock that morning, shock that the state could have power over my very difficult medical and moral decision. It catapulted my growing feminist awareness to another level. I was also embarrassed to realize the level of ignorance that had led to my pregnancy in the first place. 2 years later, after the Roe versus Wade decision, I joined my first collective, the Emma Goldman Women's Health Center, a free volunteer-run clinic. We did not do abortions, but rather we offered well woman care based on a new book, hot off the press, the first version of the Women's Health Bible, Our Bodies, Ourselves, by the Boston Women's Health Collective. At Emma's, working with a doctor, we were trained to do basic health screening and pregnancy counseling. We maintained a Rolodex, a file of doctors who respected women and gave good advice. Our members were lesbian and straight, and for the first time, I was exposed to an emerging lesbian movement and all of the questions that were fiercely debated. Was heterosexuality the root of patriarchal oppression? Was it true that any woman can be a lesbian, as Alex Dobkin sang on the album, Lavender Jane Loves Women? So it was not surprising that one evening, not long after meeting the charming Georgianne, that I had my first romantic lesbian experience at the age of 27. A beautiful discovery, but one that I found hard to explain to myself after years of dating guys. Was I a real lesbian? I wanted to be, though I knew that I had not suffered like other lesbians who had felt their difference earlier in life. But I wanted to validate this new experience. So I came up with a narrative to explain it. Hadn't I once wanted to be a nun in a community of women? Here I was doing it, a nun without a habit, but with a sex life. And in an era when nurture was considered stronger than nature, I had simply been blind to the fact that I, like many, if not most, was probably bisexual. It was society that had shown me only one direction. I quit my journalism job. I wanted to make news, not write about it. After that, I held a variety of part-time jobs to pay the rent. Eventually, I left the health center and my relationship with Georgianne ended, but I remained part of a growing lesbian feminist movement. I lived collectively with 5 women and a child. We were surrounded by music. Some of us started a weekly coffee house for local talent, the Mountain Moving Coffee, which exists to this day, or at least did until the pandemic arrived. By the mid-70s, however, I felt that I'd hit a wall and was not sure how to create my life anymore. What work should I do? What projects were important? I solved the dilemma by moving to Colorado. Thanks to a former colleague who had moved here, I had chances to visit this beautiful state. Mountains, and the sun seemed to be shining most days, even in winter. I was impressed by Governor Lamb, who turned down the Olympics to preserve the environment. In 1976, I moved to Denver. Before long, I found a girlfriend and a new feminist project, the Big Mama Rag Newspaper Collective. We put out a monthly newspaper from a tiny basement office near 18th and Gaylord. I stayed there a couple of years and then went to the Woman to Woman Feminist Book Center on East Colfax. My growing lesbian feminist activism paralleled the growth of second wave feminism throughout the country, starting with Big Mama Rag. Almost all of us were lesbian, but we did not call ourselves a lesbian paper. We covered gay and lesbian news and events, but also many feminist issues. We also wrote stories on the left about the anti-nuke movement, prison issues for women, the Black liberation movement as well. It was an exciting time as I realized how deeply feminism cut through everything. Not only had I once been so ignorant about my body and sexuality, but I had such little awareness of how patriarchy had affected literature and art and religion, politics, everything. And then there was the music. Oh, the music. Jamie Anderson's new book, An Army of Lovers, details the growth of what we called women's music. So many concerts, so many singers. Chris Williamson, Meg Christian, Margie Adam, Holly Near, Sweet Honey in the Rock, the Denver Women's Chorus and the Gay Men's Chorus. So many cultural events were blooming here. The late 70s and early 80s, it was an easy time to be a movement worker in Denver if you were relatively young and single. Rents were low, and many of us worked what we called shit jobs to support our real work, the movement. For lesbians, a popular job in the early 80s was school bus driving, as this was the era of school desegregation. After several tries, I did not have a natural talent for this, I managed to become a driver, a job I kept for several years. I enjoyed it, actually. There was lots of flexibility, and you could never fall behind in your work. If I was sick, another driver took the kids. By 1980, I had found a partner, the late Paula Sperry, and we spent 12 years together. For a time, about 4 years, we and 2 other women fostered a little boy. Gabriel came to us when he was 4, and I learned so much from that often challenging experience. Paula and I and our friends went to concerts, traveled 3 times to the Michigan Women's Music Festival, debated politics, went to the theater, Paula's profession, took care of our dogs and cats, danced at the Velvet Hammer after evening collective meetings. We always wondered why older women were not joining us. I was one of the early members of the Women's Outdoor Club in Denver, and often joined hiking and cross-country skiing trips. I really did appreciate our beautiful state, especially as a Chicago transplant. And then in the mid-80s, I hit another wall. The Woman to Woman Bookstore Collective had dissolved after a particularly acrimonious split. I had no savings. Gabriel had returned to his mother. I was in my late 30s. What would I do for the rest of my life? The answer, after soul searching and pouring through a great text, What Color is Your Parachute?, still in print, was to become a teacher, an English teacher. I entered a program at UCD aiming for a master's in education with a specialty in teaching English as a second language. I wanted to be exposed to more cultural difference then. It took 4 years of night school, but I finally graduated in 1989. Once again, debt-free, but savings completely gone. I was teaching part-time classes at UCD, Metro, Community College, and DU when I realized a dispiriting truth. Apart from working in public schools, which I was not certified for, teaching ESL was no way to financial security. How had I not known this? Some of my classmates were going to other countries for work. Japan was a hot destination then, and I decided to give it a try. My idea was to stay 1 or 2 years, save some money, and then return to my life with Paula in Denver. I had no experience living and working in another country. Fortunately, I was able to start my teaching career thanks to a job offer from Mrs. Higaki. Every summer, she used to bring her homestay students to Auraria, and I decided to ask her for a job. She directed a language school on the western edge of Tokyo in a satellite city called Machida. I got the job and started teaching there in 1990. The school did not survive, but by the time it closed 2 years later, I had landed a part-time job at a nearby university. And not long after that, had a full roster of classes at other schools, as well as some private ones. It was an exciting time, and the newness of Japan fascinated me. I think there's nothing like the first year of a chosen experience in a new place. My language skills in Japanese were still very basic, and I was timid at first, but eventually I took every opportunity to visit other parts of Japan and to explore the culture, its temples and gardens and arts, especially Kabuki theater. The food, an excellent train system, the mild climate were definite pluses as well. My relationship with Paula also got a much needed boost from the separation. It blossomed for a while, and she enjoyed coming to visit me at the end of my first year. And one other major thing contributed to my positive experience: an international lesbian community that was already well established in Tokyo. It's this community that made me feel at home in Japan, especially at the beginning, and allowed me to make a life there. Within weeks of my arrival, I was attending my first Dyke weekend at a conference center near Tokyo. There were 4 such weekends a year, and they were a chance for Japanese lesbians to meet their counterparts from other countries. We were from the US, the largest group, but also from Canada, Britain, Australia, New Zealand. This presented an interesting paradox for me. Although Japan is a far more homogeneous country than the US, I felt I was having a much more multicultural experience there, at least at the Dyke weekends. At the end of 2 years, I knew I wanted to stay in Japan. That decision led to a change in my relationship with Paula. We tried to transition into a friendship, but never quite successfully. However, we continued to meet on my yearly summer visits back to Denver. And as the time came to leave Japan years later, I hoped we could create a new strong bond. However, she died suddenly in 2009, a year before I was set to retire and return to the US. I miss her to this day. In 1995, after 5 years in Japan, one of my universities offered me a full-time job. It had benefits, a good salary, vacation, pension, and healthcare. And that sealed my decision to stay in Japan for the foreseeable future. My employer was a private Japanese university. It had a beautiful campus, and the commute was short. Also by then, I had met Junko, a Japanese woman who became my partner for 3 years, and who is still an important person in my life. The Dyke weekends continued, and I was becoming increasingly comfortable in Japan. I enjoyed teaching very much, having freedom to teach a variety of things: English communication, cross-cultural communication, writing, and seminars on different topics. I became interested in gender and language for a time. It was perfect for someone like me who wanted to be a lifelong student. As all teachers know, the best way to learn, teach. My political work shifted over time. Collectives were my focus in the 80s, but voting became my focus in the 90s and early 2000s. I joined Democrats Abroad, which has chapters in many foreign countries. Our mission was to help American nationals figure out how to vote in their home states and to raise money for campaigns. I was thrilled to learn we were considered like a state by the party, and our primary votes influenced who got nominated. In the 2000 election, our hopes were dashed when Bush beat Gore, and even more when he beat Kerry in 2004. During that time, I attended several anti-war protests in Tokyo, including one memorable one before the Iraq invasion, one of many in cities around the world. There were other outdoor events too, and we had gay pride marches in Tokyo from the mid-90s as well. I was also enjoying travel on my time off. I hadn't traveled much before I got to Japan, and I became interested in the politics of travel, how to travel responsibly and support progressive causes in other places. One of the benefits of university teaching is a very travel-friendly school calendar in Japan. We had a long spring break a month or more, an ideal time to travel to Southeast Asia and avoid the heat and the crowds of summer. I discovered a California-based NGO called Global Exchange, and they ran what they call reality tours, which means that you would go to a country and enjoy the sights, but you'd also meet people who were doing important work in that country. And part of your fee went to support those projects. Okay. I visited Cambodia, Mexico, and North Vietnam with this group. Later, through the Japan Association of Language Teachers, I joined an informal group called Teachers Helping Teachers. We were volunteers who went upon invitation to English teaching conferences in other countries to make presentations. And that's how I came to visit Laos, Central Vietnam, Russia, and Bangladesh. An interesting and economical way to travel, as lodgings were inexpensive and students took us around town. My month-long summer break was reserved for trips back to see my family and friends in the US, both in Chicago and Colorado. One year, feeling sad that I no longer had an address in my home country, I bought a tiny house and parked it on a good friend's land near Guffey in Park County, west of Colorado Springs. Every summer, I would visit Linda, a treasured friend from my early days in Denver, and stay in my little house for a bit. Eventually, I lived in it part-time after I returned permanently to the US. As for music, while in Japan, I attended concerts, both Japanese and international touring artists. K.D. Lang's Tokyo concert was really a special memory. I love taiko drumming too. Never learned it, only as an appreciator, but enjoyed it just the same. But my real musical discovery in Japan was karaoke. Karaoke here, but in Japan, karaoke. I did not anticipate this. I had thought karaoke only took place in bars where a mic was passed around and people burst into song solos in front of strangers. OMG, not for me. And then I discovered karaoke. Karaoke boxes were small rooms in multi-story buildings. They were very popular, still are. A person or group can rent one and sing their hearts out. Each room had a video machine and a huge catalog of Japanese and English language songs, with the lyrics running under the videos. Finally, I understood why the Japanese women I knew could sing whole songs by heart but my non-Japanese friends, including myself, were often hard-pressed to remember more than a few lines. I had friends who enjoyed karaoke as I did, and I joined them when I could. I sang along with some Japanese standards I was trying to learn as part of my continuing Japanese study. And then there were the many songs I remembered from the 60s and 70s. Decade changes are always a time for pause. And as I approached the 20-year mark in Japan, I decided it was time to return to the US. I was 63. Obama had just been elected in 2008, and like my friends in Democrats abroad, I was so hopeful for change in the US. Sad to leave Japan, but I looked forward to going back home. I returned in 2010. Once again, I had to confront the question of how to create my life. For the first couple of years, I lived summers in my tiny house, enjoying my first extended taste of rural life, and continuing to travel a bit or house sit during the colder months. My house was not good for year-round living at altitude 9,000 feet. By 2014, I acknowledged that, one, I was fundamentally a city girl, and two, it was time to settle down, renew old friendships, and create a new community. I moved to Denver and got on the waiting list for the senior building that I'm living in now. It suits me. I appreciate our small garden, my lovely neighbors, and City Park, which is right across the street. One of the groups I joined early on was the Rainbows Square Dance Club here in Denver. I had learned square dance in Tokyo in the only LGBTQ club in Japan. Actually, there are many other square dance clubs in Japan, which surprised me. I was pleased to continue it here. I also joined OLOC, Old Lesbians Organizing for Change, a support group for old dykes over 60. Notice that I said old, not older, old. Okay. Also, I've been in laughter yoga group for several years, one of my favorite sources for fun and healing. We're on Zoom now, but it hasn't stopped us. Another healing source is nature in City Park most days, and at my tiny house in the hills whenever I can in the summer. And then came a chance to join a new chorus called Sage Singers. I had never been in a chorus before. I'm so happy to be here. I've loved singing with you, and this group has also increased my interest in music in general. In the early days of the pandemic lockdown, I binged on opera, a new art form for me, thanks to the free streams from the Met. I also became more interested in the art of singing. I'm a fan of some YouTube people. And I've also joined Voice Circle Colorado, which meets on Zoom now. They do improvisational singing a la Bobby McFerrin and some meditative work with sound. We're always on mute, so it's quite relaxing. Like all of us whose lives changed with the lockdown in March, I've had a lot of time to reflect on life during these safer at home days. I look back at my childhood and youth and see changes, but also certain resonances. Like my childhood self, I still love to read. I cannot imagine my life without books. After so much travel during my Japan days, being a homebody rather suits me now. I don't watch Westerns anymore, but I live in the West, and perhaps those TV cowboys did their work subconsciously when it was time to move. I still have a commitment to working for social change and doing campaign work. It was a busy fall, and ultimately I voted for the party, as my dad would, that is best for working people and the person with the best character, which would please my mom. My commitments are less intense now than in my youth. I'm more attuned to self-care. My body seems to need more time for everything, particularly exercise and food. As in Gary, Indiana in the 1950s, the sky is sometimes orange here from fires due to climate change. And that creates a new urgency for future political action. I can see City Park from my apartment windows, as well as the Suncor oil refinery and our more frequent brown clouds. My Catholic faith never returned, but I replaced religion with the path of secular Buddhism and have joined a sitting group meeting on Zoom. Wi-Fi has replaced TV. I probably still spend too much time in front of a screen, but my legs have not atrophied as some adults were worried about in the 50s with the first TV generation. I no longer want to be a nun, though I think my life resembles that in many ways. I appreciate all of the communities I'm part of, okay? The women and men who enrich my life and my family, my birth family and chosen family. I'm enjoying retirement and the chance to explore new interests as a lifelong student should. I try to start each day not by rolling over and checking my phone. That is not a good way to start, but instead with a song, an open heart, or at least gratitude for the new day, gratitude for my journey, and hopefully more days ahead. That's it. Thank you for listening.
Kathy, thank you so much. That was so interesting. And every time I hear somebody's story, it just amazes me. There's so many people say to me, oh, I don't have anything to say. I don't know. I'm not going to, you know, what am I going to say? We all have these rich, inspiring lifetime experiences that, you know, have shaped who we are today.
Yes.
And every one of us has it, and yours is fascinating. So thank you again. I know we've talked before. It takes a lot of time to put this together. So I'm
you
gonna.
know, it was really worth it. I just want to say to everyone who hasn't done it yet, at first I was thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to fill 40 minutes?
Right.
But the real challenge is streamlining. Lots of things happen to us in life, you know, and we have many choices to look back at what the connections were, how one thing led to another, and choose the things that we want to remember. So I encourage everyone to sign up.
Sign up. Call me. We're going to open it for some questions. Anybody want to dig deeper into any area that Kathy talked about, or maybe something that you relate to? If you, oh, there is Betsy McConnell. Hi,
Yeah.
Betsy.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. That was wonderful. About life in Japan, fascinating. I think I knew you first from Olak.
Mm-hmm. Another old dyke, yes.
Right, one of the old ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what? I bet I knew you in the Women's Outdoor Club, but I don't remember that. When were you in the outdoor club?
Gosh, you know, I wish I had a diary marking that, or there's a history. It was the early 80s, I'm sure.
That was the first group that I joined when I decided I was coming out. Yeah. So I might have, we might have crossed paths then, but
might have hiked together.
We're still OLOC members together. But thank you so much. That was really wonderful. And I second what what Kathy said about putting together your story. It's a good experience. It's very enlightening in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think you get impressed with yourself, don't you? As you were writing all the people that did it, you thought, wow, you know, you remember things and you thought, oh yeah, then I turned left here and then I went straight and turned right, you know, it's good for you as well. Betsy, and Kathy, I just wanted to say, who was in the Women's Outdoor Club back in the mid 80s and 90s? So it's Judith, Janice, Mo, Kathy, Elizabeth, Deb. Anybody else I'm missing? No.
Yeah, mid 80s or late 80s. That's probably maybe late 80s. I was.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. Okay, moving on. Kate Burns, and then Larry.
Kathy, I just got to say, oh, what great history in this talk. And when you were talking about the early feminist movement and then the lesbian feminist movement and the collectives and things, that's lived experience of things that I grew up admiring so much and so appreciate all of you pioneers at that time. What a great life of social justice work. I can imagine when, you sum up your life, you must feel very satisfied with what you have done, not just for your local family and communities, but for the world. And I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. That was lovely. Mr. Larry O'Donnell.
Well, thank you very much for your story and your interest in social justice. It's just fascinating. I just have one quick question. You were in Japan for 25 years or 20 years, sorry. Did you learn Japanese? Are you fluent in Japanese?
The answer is yes, but if you ask me how well, I would probably have to say not nearly as well as people assume from that length of time. I have many excuses for not learning it better, which I won't bore you with, but I will say it gave me my own struggle, or my own attempts, gave me a lot of insight into just how challenging learning a language is. And I appreciate people who achieve real fluency. I mean, at levels that I didn't reach.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great job.
Great job. Oh, have you talked to Laurel Burns about Japan?
We haven't had a real discussion on it yet. We really should.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Kate, how long did she live there?
I think 9 years, and there was overlap definitely, and she went to some of the Dyke weekends, so maybe you all, connected in some way.
I'm sure we know people in common, so we'll have to do that. Yeah.
Okay, I think Carol White has her hand up, and then Judith. Carol and then Judith.
Yes. Kathy, I just wanted to tell you that I appreciate it so much, and I think you had a wonderful story, and it was so well written and so well delivered. And I just appreciate it so much and appreciate getting to know you better. And it makes me want to deepen our friendship. So just thank you and congratulations.
Thank you, Carol. Don't you find, everybody, that, so we're all in a community of sage singers, and we say hello and we can tease and we go, oh, I like Jana and I like Tom, and and then you hear people's stories and it brings us all so closer, I guess that's not a great word to describe it, but anyway, I just feel like we know you better, and it's important. It's important to know you better, and Carol and everybody else who's told their stories. And for those of you who will be telling your stories, Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, Kathy, I always knew you had just an incredible story. I didn't know exactly what it was other than living in Japan for 20 years, but I was so inspired hearing all of it. And I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I want to ask, several of the women have talked about their activism, and, they're in Women's Outdoor Club, which was just more of a social thing, but some of the political organizations that women were involved in back then, and the whole music scene, as you brought up. But I want to ask some men, if anybody wants to respond, how does that make you feel when you hear women talking about, I joined this because we were protesting or working towards more equality? And what are men's experiences around that whole movement? Anybody? Guess nothing. Then I'm going to ask Mr. Sparky here. Sparky, what was your... Anyway, just something I'm thinking about, what was going on. Did men feel not threatened, but did it make them realize more about how they were participating in life and maybe how they were looking at women? And
Oh, I sure should comb my hair. I have
Jude?
a question.
Yeah,
The men, a lot of the men were involved in HIV stuff and
yes,
AIDS.
yeah,
And that was something that descended upon them instead of them seeking out how to answer a problem.
yeah. Good point. Good point. Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, get
Barely.
get a
Come
little
closer.
closer, Teresa.
Hi, darling.
Hi.
The key took the best seat in the house, so nothing new there. I just want to say that I just thought it was so great to hear about your life, young lady. And I think the parts where you just said, I kept deciding, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? And I think, you know, it just really inspired me. And thanks for your activism and work and knowledge and absolute joy. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Teresa.
Yeah.
Cheers.
And we also, you know, I feel like I've
Thank you,
I've
guys.
said this about a lot of stories that they're so inspiring, and maybe that word gets overused, but it really is. Your story is inspiring, and everybody who has told their story is very inspiring, at least to me. So I'm sure to others as well.
How about Tim Cole?
Oh, did Tim have? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Hi. Well, I wanted to first of all say, Kathy, yes, thank you. It's so wonderful to hear your story and your life of activism and your life of what your life has been, and it's just so marvelous to hear that, and just is wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to share it with us. I really appreciate that, and I also appreciate the fact that you're a fellow rainbow as well, you know. But just one quick question for you, and then I want to answer something Mo said. When did you join the Rainbows?
You know, it was actually a couple of years after I returned, probably about 2012 or 2013, because I was up in the hills most of the time or traveling. So it took a while before I really reconnected. Yeah.
Because you started with them when I was on hiatus with them. I took some time off, and you came when I was not there, because I'd been with them since 1997 when I first moved out here.
Oh,
and
wow.
So I but you joined when I was on hiatus, and then I came back and met you there, and which was a delight. So but anyway, so I did want to thank you for your wonderful story. And I wanted to say to Mo that for me, I've always had women friends that were very active and have been lives of political activism. And so to me, I don't feel threatened by that. I feel it's wonderful. I feel it's like I want to surround myself with people that are working towards justice and working towards activism. And I feel like that has always been sort of the people that are in my life that are important to me. And of course, the point was made about HIV, but so many of the women assumed a role in activism, you know, helping people with HIV, and so that became like it may have affected gay men first, but women were on the forefront making activism for that, and so I feel like that's always been a part, and I can't imagine life without that. I can't imagine what life would have been if you know the committed, caring, wonderful women that have taken this up weren't there, you know, if they didn't choose that. So you know, I think to hear that about a life of activism is so wonderful and so inspiring. So So anyway, that's my answer to both of those questions. So,
Thank you,
Well,
Tim.
I have an answer too, in that that's when gay men and lesbians started speaking to each other.
Yes.
Instead of, I
yeah,
mean, in some ways, lesbians are anti-men in a social sense, in the same way with gay men not associating with a lot of women as if they're going to date them or something. But as two political groups, that's where we coalesced. And it
Great
stayed
point.
that way, even though
Great
the
point,
HIV
Jude.
isn't a super
Yep.
bad thing at this point.
Right.
Great point. Hmm.
Thank you, Jude. And Tim Wilson has his hand up.
Well, a couple things. First, Kathy, thank you so much. I think something that, from my perspective, it takes quite a bit of courage to pick up and move to another country, and I find that most admirable. And if I want to use the word inspiring, I mean, I love my international travel, but to pick up and move to another country, just that just takes a tremendous amount of courage, I think, and I applaud you for that. I was, back to Mo's question, in high school, I was pretty oblivious to what was going on politically, and I think it's partly because we didn't have a TV in our house until I was a senior in high school. And I think, you know, there's pluses and minuses to that, of course, like anything else. But I still remember vividly the first women's music concert I went to at North High School. I mean, it's like the women's music movement really was part of inspiring me during my activist years. So I don't know how many of you got to see the history of the women's music movement in the lobby of the LGBT Center. I don't know if it's still up. You know, they've been closed during the pandemic, but if it's still up, it's absolutely worth spending an hour there reading all of the captions that go with all of the pictures, and it's done chronologically. It was quite a magnificent historical display.
Thank you, Tim. I want to say one other thing about men and women getting together. There was a time in Denver that if women went into the men's bars, they were really ostracized, at least visually, you know, if not said, having something said to you, and probably vice versa. And one of the things that Carol is responsible for, besides, you know, when she got Harmony together, it was men and women. And I can't tell you how many women in the chorus said, including us, Jan and I, say, you know, we're always hanging around women. We're always in these women feminist activist groups. Let's meet some men. And that's why we joined initially. And I can't tell you how many women said that and how many men said they joined because they wanted more women in their lives. So, you know, to add to what you said, Jude, and it was the AIDS crisis was going on smack dab when we started. So I think that in a way brought us all together. Anybody else have a question or a comment?
I'll say, I just wanted to say, Kathy, how much I appreciate the fact that you took the time to do this and were not afraid to share your story and to speak with us. And I found it really fascinating, and I loved that you did different things throughout your life, and that you would work on one matter and then just, what will I do next in my life? And I think that's really exciting as someone who just picked a career because my sister said it was a good way to, you know, earn a living. And I said, okay. And then I've just done it. And it's not something I really love, but I'm almost finished. But I just really admire that about you and what you've done. And I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Yes.
Thank you. It also it makes me feel better too, because for so often I thought, why have I always been a jack of all trades and master of none, you know? And I've really admired people who kind of find a purpose earlier and they develop it and become like great. So closest I got to that was Japan, but where I really did develop my teaching skills, but still. So anyway,
You know,
all of
that's,
our life journey brings something. Go ahead.
sorry, Kat, that's saying jack of all trades, master of none. We got to get that out of our language. I heard that growing up as well. And, you know, it doesn't mean you have one career your whole life. Look at the things that you've done and experienced. You're a master of experiences, you know, and you're not. Yeah, no, that's what's important. And so so don't say that anymore, and I won't say it anymore.
Okay.
I've been proud my whole life about being a jack of all trades and master of none. So it's been a point of pride for me.
We are masters, whatever we experience, and from that's, you know. Anybody else have a comment?
Becky Williams says she's a Renaissance woman. That's a good way to look at it.
Yes, you are, Kathy. Yes, you are. So.
I like that image. All right.
Maybe when we get back together, you could teach us a little Japanese song, maybe just like 2 lines, because I know it'd be hard.
Let me think about that.
Yeah.
I just want to say I'm grateful, Kathy, to you for being a person who doesn't make separations, who just accepts everyone as part of the universe. And I'm proud to be affiliated with Sage Singers, who endorses all the corners of our community. And without the men and the women and the trans and everybody, we're really not our community. So gung ho.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to let everybody go. Thank you again, Kathy. And it was just a wonderful talk. Let everybody wave at Kathy. And thank you. Just
yes.
Thanks,
Kathy. Thanks, everyone. Till next time, more stories all the way around.
Thanks, Kathy.
All right. All right. Take care, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.